This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 344, Off the Cuff, Cypress, new tools, and more. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Cypress and other new tools that we've started using. I'm Nick Laughlin, and today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Bacozzi.
Hello, internet friends.
Also joining us for the next 4 weeks is our new guest host, Chris Wells. Chris is the chief geek at Redfin Solutions, a Drupal agency who's been working exclusively in Drupal since version 4.7. And he tells me that he's beyond honored to hold this guest spot for the next few weeks. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, always good to be here, and thank you. I truly am honored.
John, looks like you've got a quick update for our listeners.
I do, and everybody's shocked by this. I shaved, so
it's an audio medium. So.
DrupalCon's coming up. You see me. I'm not going to have any facial hair. I'm not going to have my beard. If you watch us on YouTube, I'm not going to have a beard. Same person, just don't have any facial hair. That's it. That's my update.
So we have a new module of the week that looks like it comes to us from Redfin Solutions. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about Flush?
Oh, I would be honored, guys. It's really probably, I think we've achieved, really, this is the apex of Drupal contrib here. This probably is going to I'm going to make a push for this in Core in 10. It's amazing. It's called Flush. This is actually my business partner, Patrick's. It's been this little dream in the back of his mind for years and years and years. He's wanted this to exist. And we just got a new part-time sort of intern-y person who's coming on board, and we needed to get him into something in terms of Drupal custom module development and getting him exposed to some of the APIs and how the cache works, and needed some sort of pet project to sick him on. And so the Flush module is a module which, when you flush the cache, plays a toilet flushing sound using HTML5 audio autoplay and some JavaScript. And you'd be really surprised how much it took just to do that, in terms of learning. You look at it, you say it's a very simple module, but we had to understand we don't want to cache the HTML5 on the cache flush and have it play then on every subsequent page load. So we actually had to dig into cache kill switch so that it wouldn't cache the page after the flush, whatever page you were on when you flush the cache, and then attaching JavaScript libraries and writing JavaScript libraries. It has a little bit of config because you can actually override the toilet flushing sound with your own MP3. So, it ships with the default noise, but you could use your own. It could even be, I might commission John Bacozzi to just, say into that mic, like, your cache has been flushed. And I'll just have that play on all of our production sites whenever it flushes. So it's cool. It's been around literally a day. We shipped it to Drupal.org yesterday. And, all I can say is, if you get it on your site for a week and our intern sees the numbers go up past 0, he would probably be more than thrilled. So it's a small play to our listeners.
I know what I'm doing on the plane trip to DrupalCon now.
That's right.
And here's one for you, Chris. I'm John Bacozzi, and your flush has been cached.
Yep. No, you nailed it. Wow.
Yeah. Oof.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
Try again.
I'm John Bacozzi, and your cache has been flushed.
Wow, that was clean. That was a clean take.
Yeah, I'm usually like a 1 or 2 take pony here. Sometimes, maybe, I don't know.
It is really interesting how small projects like this can actually, really spin off some more work. So over in Project Browser, we're trying to look at how categories work for Drupal.org projects. Right now, there's 55 categories that you can tag your project in. And so it was really cool to take this intern with very little experience and say, how would you tag this module? Like, what would you put it in? We have a novelty.
So let us know. What did he come up with? Because I'm interested.
Yeah, so he's working with Leslie on that, and we'll see. I assume it would be at least in novelty and perhaps in games and amusements, but we'll see.
There's no poopy farty category on Drupal.org?
Not yet, but again, we're looking at that for Project Browser. Come find us at DrupalCon. We're going to talk about
So-
how to recategorize stuff.
Not to go.
I am curious about one thing. And how did you get around the autoplay? Like, there's a lot of browsers that just block autoplay audio out of the gate. Did you have any issue with that?
Yeah. So what actually, the way that it behaves is browsers these days are using they're using sort of a metric, an internal metric of engagement with the website as to whether or not you'll autoplay. So if you land on that site, it's not going to autoplay. But if you've engaged with that site, clicked some things, scrolled, and then you go to kind of a new page, it will let you autoplay. And so we did it with, and I don't know that we actually used the autoplay attribute. I think we did a dot play to get it started, and I don't know if that has any different factors. But by the time you're flushing the cache, you've probably interacted with that website enough that you've passed the criteria. So we didn't really have an issue with it, which I was surprised.
So
awesome.
I have one other question, only loosely related to this module. In our show notes, I noticed the URL you dropped in was dgo.2/flush. And I'm wondering, is that obviously it's a link shortener. And I had no idea that was a thing that existed. Is that like a widely used link shortener? Did I just out some like proprietary Redfin technology?
No, this is my shocked face. So what actually happened, someone wrote a URL shortener for Drupal long ago, bought dgo.to. I've been using it for years and years and years. And he was actually trying to find someone to take it over in the last year because he bought the domain for 10 years or something and it was finally expiring. When it finally expired, several people started pulling their hair out about it not working anymore. And so actually Redfin stepped in. We now own the domain. But the Drupal Greek community had been running a fork at dgo.re. And so in a partnership with them, we point the dgo.to to their shortener. And so, it's amazing. dgo.to/whatever will go to the project page. If you do /a/, it will go to that on api.drupal.org. If you do like dgo.to/@John Picozzi, it'll go to your Drupal user page.
Wow.
Yeah, I use it all the time. It's a great little tool.
Is there a like manual page for this link shortener?
Right at the homepage. So if you just do dgo.to,
okay, we're gonna
it'll tell you all the shortcuts that are available.
We're gonna put that in the show notes. And whoa, all right. I'm glad I asked that question because it was a learning experience for me. I'm sure it was a learning experience from others too.
Yeah.
So moving on from one of our more exciting modules of the week, we do have a number of primary topics this week. The first one of which is Cypress. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about Cypress and how you use it?
Yeah. So Cypress is, I'm going to call it, I should read from their website. I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to call it a modern end-to-end testing tool. They say that the web has evolved. Finally, testing has too. Fast, easy, and reliable testing for anything that runs in a browser. So I think about old Selenium tests, especially where you had, I forget what it was called. There was like a Firefox extension where you could like record the actions you took on a website and then you could play them back and see how they behaved. And Cypress is really like, in my mind, the next iteration of that. It works incredibly reliably, and it's used for end-to-end testing, which is a lot of kind of, I think, where people start with manual testing. So, I think it was actually Stephen Cross. He talked a lot about testing at different conferences and camps, and maybe even on Talking Drupal as well. And I remember him saying, you kind of start with manual testing. You sign in, and you go to the page and does it work when you go to the page? And a lot of this stuff is kind of implicitly understood that like when I go to Node add news, do I get the form? If I don't, I've got a problem. And Cypress takes some of that same mentality and translates it to being automated. So if you go to the page and that page does not give you a 200, the test will automatically fail. But then you can add in anything else that you want to do, like assert that this text appears on the page. You can fill forms using the type method. So yeah, we've been using it to write tests for a project that we're doing now, which is actually a progressively decoupled Drupal-backed app using Svelte on the front end. And so it's great because we can use the end-to-end testing, and we can test the Svelte side of things and the Drupal data entry side of things, the entire app, any URL that you can visit, and then you can make assertions about things that should be true or things that should be possible or things that should be visible. And it's all in JavaScript. So it's a JavaScript package. You can add it with Yarn or NPM. You just Yarn add Cypress or NPM install Cypress. We make it a dev dependency, or we actually no. The way we've been doing it is we've been building it up as a separate sort of suite off the tests folder. So your standard Drupal composer template comes with like /tests /bhat, I think, and so we do /tests /Cypress, and we pull in all of our Cypress stuff there, and then we write our tests in JavaScript, and away we go.
So
it's really
okay. So my first question, whenever I start to learn about a new tool like this, is what is the onboarding like? For example, I've not used it before. You've told me about it. If I'm sitting down starting this, how quickly do you think it would take before I'd be able to start writing? I guess that it's a two-part question. How quickly before I can write my first kind of dummy test, and how quickly before I'm writing actual tests that are helpful? Is it a couple hours? Is it a couple days? Is it weeks?
That's a really good point, because to be perfectly honest, we haven't had a ton of great luck with adoption of testing over at Redfin, and I think that the reason why this has become something is because it's so easy to use. So I would say that you can follow the tutorial and get a Hello World test running in 15 minutes. The next question that comes in after that is, when are you, how first of all, how is your JavaScript, right? That's a little bit of the, all of the tests are written in JavaScript language, more or less. So you are writing, similar to like document query selector. So you do a CY for the Cypress object, cy.get, and then you pass to the get your selector, which might be an ID or whatever it happens to be. And then you can do whatever it is that you want with that. If you just get it and it can't be got, if that fails, then your test will fail. It's some of that implicit testing that I talked about before. So it's pretty easy if you can write jQuery, I would say. You cy.visit and you pass the relative URL of what page you want to go to. So for example, I have a suite that cy.visits node add whatever, and then I do a bunch of gets on the IDs of the form values, and I do cy.get this ID, and then I do .type, and then I've pulled in, it's a Node project, so you can pull in any libraries that are useful to you with Node. So I pulled in like the Faker library, I generate a fake title, fill in the node title, I click the save button, and when I get to that page, I cy.get the h1 and make sure that the title I generated on the form is the title that's then displayed on the h1 on the page that loads, which is the view page for that node. So as long as you can write some JavaScript, you can write the tests. Where it really becomes useful is the question mark around it is, when can you write useful tests? And that has a lot more to do with you as a test writer and you understanding what is useful to you. So it really shines when it comes down to, okay, I want to sign in and I want to make sure I can create a node, but now I'm going to sign out and make sure that I cannot create that node, or that if you have access protected areas of your site, you can run those access checks and make sure that you haven't had a regression in your permissions configuration or something like that, as you've been developing the project. So It's really nice in that way, and there's so many plugins for it. There's for one, there is a beta feature built right in. If you enable it in your config, which is cypress.json, you can turn on experimental studio true, and you write a simple test like hello world or something, and then what you can do is actually start recording and clicking inside of the Cypress browser, and it will record the IDs that you clicked on, record what you typed in. So you can use that. I used that. We had a really long form that we needed to fill in for this node type. So I did that, and then I went back and changed a few IDs, updated the data to be something that I generated automatically with Faker, and tested for that. We've also plugged in the Cypress-Drupal NPM package to it, which will, it doesn't do a lot, but it definitely does some very helpful things, like it'll let you just log in very easily, or it'll let you run any drush command that you want. So I actually have one test I run uses devel generate to kill all of my news items and then generate 50 of them, because I want to make sure I have enough that it require. Actually, I think I generate 51 because I want to make sure that that will generate 3 pages of news items, because we have 25 per page on this. So I check the pager, make sure it has a last button, make sure there's 3 pages, make sure that the text appears.
So it sounds like it's got some light integration in Drupal, but a lot of the getting the database generated, that kind of, or set up is on you.
Yeah, and there are there's fixtures in Cypress so that you can mock any API calls, or you can seed a database with a testing database if you want to do that. What we do is we actually run it against the latest copy of live, so we'll sync down live and sanitize it. I do run the test locally, so kind of on my horizon is figuring out how to do this in GitLab CI, which is our CI tool of choice, but Cypress actually has how-tos for 4 different popular CIs, including GitLab CI. So yeah, you can run this sort of headless in CI. It'll run headless Chrome, or it'll also can help you do browser testing. So it assumes Chrome by default, but any browser that you have running locally, it can run. And it can run those tests at different viewports. So you can write a test that makes sure when you shrink to under 600 that this menu disappears and this menu is visible. So anything that's really, it is that end-to-end. This is not for unit testing. It's more at least integration testing and sort of higher, like really end-to-end testing. And
it says that it supports Linux. Have you used it with Linux? Or
yeah, it's really in a lot of ways built for Linux, but it does need to more or less be a Linux that will support, headless Chrome. Or if you want to watch the tests run, then it needs to have a GUI, and you need to be able to run Chrome. And so running it locally is great. The way that we've integrated it into our process is to the person who's merging that user story ticket, the sort of team lead or the person who's responsible for that, is also writing and running the tests at that point as well. And so I run them all locally before I consider it done and merge it into the main line. So that's kind of how we've embraced it now, but I'd love to get it into the CI as well, for other merge requests moving forward. We've plugged in there's a Cypress Axe, so we've run the Axe accessibility scanner. It'll automatically run Axe accessibility. You can do it for the whole page, or you can do it for just the div you're interested in this test, and anything below. Actually found that Drupal's pager is not really accessible because it includes an H4, and so that news page that had the pager on it, we went right from an H1 to an H4, and we had a problem there. So I actually updated some of my theming. I found an open issue on Drupal for it. So there's tons of really good plugins for Cypress.
You made Nick's day by saying that it was actually built for Linux. He's a Linux lover, as are many of us. I have a question in regards to how Cypress compares to other testing tools, and like what I guess what makes Cypress better, or why did you choose Cypress over some other tools out there?
Yeah. Where I discovered it was actually on the syntax FM podcast that Wes Boss and Scott Talinsky have. Scott's an old Drupaler from back in the day, but they do a lot of front end stuff now. And they were really raving about, like to Nick's point earlier, how easy it was to set up and get running and have some tests going. And what I wanted to do was sort of replicate that idea of the manual tests. And for me, I love how it plugs into that idea of, I just want to run my manual tests automatically. So the fact that I already have the database that has the production menu items in the header, I can go and look at those and make sure they're the actual right ones that it should be for production. I don't have a ton of experience with things like Behat. I'd say it's very close to Behat, but you can pick it up from wherever your project is and start running those tests, as if you were doing it manually. But really, I chose it because they raved about it. I tried it out, and because I was able to get it up and running so fast, I said, this is the thing.
How quick do the tests run? Is it?
As much as you would. They run faster than if you were doing them manually, but it is, a real browser, and it's waiting for the browser page to load before it, goes and fills in all the fields. When you use the type method, it does actually type the words in, so you actually don't see it fill instantaneously. You see it fill one character at a time. They're really trying to replicate an end user's behavior because, maybe you're trying to test some JavaScript character counter thing, and you want to make sure that after you type 15 characters, it says that only 35 remain. And you can do that. Anything JavaScript, anything in the DOM, it's really sitting at that top level, the same as a human would be.
So it's going to be a lot slower if you're on a 4G network.
Absolutely, if you were to do that. But most of the
however,
stuff,
you could test that though, right?
Yes, you could probably throttle it. There's like Gherkin plugins for Cypress. You could write your tests in Gherkin, and I think it would interpret some things for you like that. I don't do it that way, but maybe if I was coming from Behat or something, I would have. But it's got a really big ecosystem around it, so there's tons of good plugins. I'm curious if we come back in a few weeks and anyone else has tried it, what cool stuff they've found.
Yeah, you can drop into the Talking Drupal chat on Drupal chat, Drupal Slack, and start a whole conversation about Cypress. So that'd be a great way to send feedback. So let's move on to our next topic, which is interesting because a little background here. We started using HackMD, which is what we're talking about, for show notes on Talking Drupal. Nick, what would you say, like 3 months ago, 4 months ago?
Yeah, 3 or 4 months ago, maybe.
Right. And I kind of, and when I say show notes, like, I mean the post-production show notes that we send out to all of our listeners. So I kind of knew about it. And a couple weeks ago, a client said to me like, oh, hey, can we write documentation in Markdown? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. So I got some VS Code plugins for Markdown and, started working on kind of like a quote unquote local environment for Markdown, which was fine. It was all right. And then the same client said, well, we're using for another set of documentation, we're using HackMD. And I was like, I feel like I've heard about that before. It was like one of those things, and people will laugh. If you're a longtime listener, you kind of remember Mailhog and the fact that I think we had the same scenario of me forgetting Mailhog after we had already talked about it on a show or been using it for something. Anyway, started using HackMD. So basically, HackMD, what is HackMD? It's a Markdown tool that allows you to basically collaborate on Markdown files. So you have the ability to see your Markdown in one pane, one side of the screen, and then see the output on the other side of the screen of your Markdown. Gives you the ability to comment, gives you the ability to kind of like share, and makes it really easy to edit Markdown files, and just really easy to collaborate on them, which was actually something I was struggling with my local instance, being able to share that.
Yeah, the one of the key features like John's saying, is that it's collaborative. So when John said that you can comment on it, you can comment in line on the rendered markup like you do with Google Docs, for example. So if you want to ask a question about something but don't want to put it in the markdown, you can highlight some of the text, leave a comment at somebody and say, hey, is this what you really meant? Or, whatever your question is, and they'll get a notification. But it goes beyond that. There's a couple of really nice things that HackMD does for entering content. So they have it's like a wrapper around Markdown. So for example, if you are writing normal Markdown in a README file, for example, in order to share that, you need to commit it. You need to push that up to Git. Somebody needs to know what Git is. They need to know to edit, how to edit it. If you're making a list, you have to hit enter, tab, add a dash or an asterisk, all that kind of stuff. Well, with HackMD, if you're in a list and you're adding a new item, you just hit enter at the end and it automatically adds, the next bullet for you. You can highlight a bunch of text in, it's kind of like Word or Google Sheet, Google Docs. You just hit the list icon and it makes the entire thing a list. You can highlight something, hit tab, and it will indent that list for you. So it just has a bunch of tooling around making the editing experience really easy.
The other nice thing that I found is image handling. It allows you to upload an image or drop in it. Like typically with a markdown file, like you have to store that image somewhere. Like obviously like it's got to be stored. You can upload it to HackMD, I guess, and they provide you with a short URL to it and everything, and they drop it right in for you. So that aspect of it made it really great, especially for documentation where you're like, here's what it's going to look like. I will say one thing, and this is kind of like doesn't have much to do with HackMD, but our client is ultimately, as many people do, using Confluence for documentation and different parts of the project. Confluence does allow you to import Markdown. So you have the ability, if you're adding a page in Confluence, you can import Markdown for that page. The issue there, a gotcha, if you will, is that I have yet to find a way to export that Markdown from Confluence once you import it. I think Confluence actually converts it to HTML once it's imported. So just a note that if you're using Confluence and you import things as Markdown, you're still going to want to keep the core Markdown or the original Markdown documents, because you may not be able to get it out of Confluence, or at least I haven't found a way. So again, if somebody knows of a way, feel free to jump into Talking Drupal chat on Drupal Slack and let me know. Because
there are a couple other really neat things too about it. For example, if you want to link something, you can just highlight, like you just copy the URL you want to link, you highlight the text in the Markdown file, and you paste the link, and it automatically wraps it. So it's super nice. And one of the reasons we started using it, so people may not realize this, but the show notes actually get used in a bunch of different places after we publish the show. So it gets posted, parts of it gets posted to Patreon, parts of it get posted to the website, parts of it get posted to Libsyn, and the newsletter. And when we used to just manage it directly in Google Docs, and Google Docs doesn't copy and paste well into all those environments. HackMD pastes perfectly in all of them. So it just means it used to be I would, finish writing up, or Stephen, when he was doing it, I would finish writing up Google Docs and then have to copy and paste and then fix things depending on which environment I was pasting them into. With HackMD, I just copy the rendered Markdown and paste it, and it just works. One other minor gotcha that I hit for a client, we were documenting some HTML stuff. If you have an open tag, you have to close all your HTML tags in the Markdown. If you have an open tag in the Markdown, it breaks all the nice things. So for some reason, I had an open tag in one document and none of the nice things were working. Like hitting enter after the bullets wasn't adding a new bullet, and it took me a while to figure out. And
odd that it would require you to have valid HTML in order to work appropriately.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't even HTML. Like the client had used like angle bracket TBD angle bracket to mark like a section as not, not finished yet.
It wasn't even
And so
a real
it was
HTML tag.
Yeah, so it was seeing that as HTML and it was breaking everything. So once I closed it.
Are you aware of the comments functionality? Not the like, the inline like markdown comment functionality that HackMD has, because it'll allow you to drop comments into the markdown that you can like see on the
yeah, you can even color those. So if you have like a warning or an alert or something, you can add a color and it'll put a colored bar next to it. Yeah.
Chris Wells, just out of curiosity, using HackMD, ever heard of HackMD? Use Markdown? Ever?
So I'm bullish on Markdown. I believe Markdown is probably the best tool in a lot of scenarios. Probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I was looking for a new sort of wiki tool or documentation tool for inside of Redfin, and this did not exist. But what I was looking for was the perfect confluence, between Markdown and people who don't want to use Markdown. Some people just want to click that list button and type their list, and other people want to, do space star, and I want to do space star, and I was not going to compromise on that. This sounds like it really fits both of those needs really well. Yeah. Some people can just click the bullet. I want Drupal's commenting issue queue threads to use something like this, where I can just do Markdown, and it will. It's like I want like something slightly better than BU editor, And I think that it's Markdown.
It also has like preview. Vim. It also has like Vim integration, like
key bindings
Vim
and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So if you like that, or Emacs, it's a really powerful tool. It's hackmd.io. And one other thing too is we're also using that Markdown for a particular project. We're using that in Git as well. So we collaborate on the documentation in HackMD, and then when it's determined that it's ready, quote unquote, we just copy the Markdown side, paste that into the project, and so then it's documented in GitHub as well. And then if there's any updates later, we just we just occasionally just copy the documentation from HackMD over to GitHub. It's a really powerful tool. Really happy with it. So I've got another tool I kind of want to mention. I want to shout out. This was called out to me by one of our patrons. Thank you, Peter. It's not a tool that I've used, but that's not going to stop me from talking about it. There's a project called Quant-ux.com. And like I said, I haven't used it yet, but I'm really excited to start using this on a project that it may fit for, because it's kind of an open source Figma that gives you a lot of the same tools that Figma provides, but it looks like it also provides some user testing tools that are traditionally really complicated to integrate with or use. So for example, you can build an experience in this tool, Quant UX, and then share those designs with an end user, and then it will build heat maps and content user journeys through your prototypes for you. There is, and I kind of like the, for example, the pricing page. There is a pricing page, and
I went there immediately.
Pricing is $0. This is open source. It's been around for 5 or 6 years, I think. I think you can get support from the maintainer. I think there's just a couple of maintainers, but it's an open source project that kind of gives you a lot of the same powerful tools. I mean, I'm sure you guys have used Figma. It's really powerful, but it's always nice to see open source competitors to tools like that. And I think you can use Figma to do prototyping. I certainly have clients that do that, but I've not seen that kind of integrated with the heat maps and content A/B testing and all that stuff. So it's a really cool looking tool. Looking forward to using it on a project hopefully this year.
Yeah, we've been using InVision to do something like this. Where you can
I remember that one.
You can ship like Sketch or whatever up into InVision, and then have clickable prototypes there. So we've been doing that for a while. Paid service, obviously. So, this could be a great move there. And I
feel like
also there's another project similar to this, kind of more up and coming, called Penpot, which is attached to Taiga, and that company, Kaleidos, open source company, Kaleidos. So we use Taiga for our agile project management, and then they've now got Penpot that they've spun out as well.
Taiga, like the
Tundra. Yeah, it's taiga.io, taiga.io.
I have an odd question about this, and I'm assuming both of you are looking at the Quant UX website, and I'm just curious if there's a bit of personalization going on here. If you scroll down to like the section where it does testimonials, are we seeing the same 4 people?
I see somebody from Anna Correa, Jeff Wayne, Charles Lorenz.
We are seeing the same. We are seeing the same people. Okay.
I think I know. Well,
and
that could
a
also be
professor from Brown.
And the reason I ask is because like Brown's a local university, and I used to do some work for them. And
me too. So it's possible that it's personalized for both of us.
So I know somebody. I also know somebody from Pyramid Systems, like, and I was just curious, like, if there was some sort of more social, like, pinpointing going on there as to like, hey, you people are saying this thing's great. Anyway, I digress.
Okay, so the next thing is something that a few years ago probably would have been a topic, but over the last couple of years, I've taken on a couple of non-Drupal projects. That they've generally been smaller side projects, but I'm curious if you guys have been working on anything that's non-Drupal specific.
Yeah, I've been doing something pretty cool that I like, that I can talk about if you want.
Tell us more.
Yeah, good. I'm also big on Svelte. I really enjoy Svelte as a front-end framework. I could never quite grok React super easily. There's a great meme out there about like, here's how you set up a reactive variable in React, and here's your on mount, and here's your X, and then you set local state, and then it cuts over to Svelte, and it's like, let X equal 1. And that's how you do it. And if you use X in your component later, if X changes, it automatically reacts. It's amazing. So I really like Svelte. I love where it's headed. I know there's new stuff up and coming. But for our sort of front-end framework of choice right now is Svelte. And much like other decoupled projects or front-end framework projects have, so there's React, which is sort of your lower level, like what is the framework? And then there's like a meta framework kind of built on top of that. Brian Perry has a really great pyramid of this from his presentation on Drupal State that he did at Florida Drupal Camp. It's a great presentation. We took stuff from it right away and moved it into our Svelte progressively decoupled app.
But I will say, if you're going to DrupalCon, Brian will be presenting, I believe, on State at DrupalCon, so you can catch that too.
Ah, nice. So, something like Next.js is sort of a meta framework built on top of React. Svelte Kit is kind of the Next.js for Svelte. It's like an opinionated way of how you should build a Svelte app. And it has support for things like automatic routing. So if you go to /routes and make a whatever.svelte, that's your page. That's your page component for that for that route. And it has, if you do a route that ends in .js, it assumes that is an endpoint. And so that's like an API call that you'd be fetching from your front end. So we have built sort of an internal dashboard for folks at Redfin where they can say, like we replaced a Google Sheet that we used of like, what days will you be in the office and what days will you be working from home, with a little page on our Redfin dashboard where you can mark, will you be working? Will you be in the office? Do you have any special notes for that day? Like if you're leaving early. And it was really easy to make like a nice reactive, automatically saving tool for that. And then it calls out to the endpoint to save that data. And that endpoint is Node.js on the server side, and it's writing to just a MySQL database where we're storing that information. We're also pulling in, we use Harvest for time tracking. So we pull people's hours that they've recorded and we pull them over the Harvest API into that same MySQL database. So we can look at all that aggregated data and build reports on it. We're using Forecast, which is another product from Harvest, which will, spell out what people should be working on over the next 6 weeks or months and, forecast their time and resources. And we pull that in also to that MySQL database. So the whole front end side of this thing is SvelteKit, really, where we're pulling data out of the MySQL database, and then all those automatic sync jobs where we're just pulling data from different APIs from all of our ticketing systems, because we use Taiga for agile projects, we use Redbooth for ongoing support. Some of our other clients use different projects like project management systems like Hive. We can pull data in from Hive. So we can present our employees with like a unified dashboard of like, here's everything that's assigned to you across 5 different systems, and you can go into one system and see that. And so all of that stuff, we actually use Laravel 0 to do that, which is basically a stripped down Laravel designed for writing CLI applications, and just using, pull this over the API and stuff it in a MySQL database. And that's all we're kind of doing with it. And then we're pulling all that stuff out with SvelteKit. It's really snappy. It's very fast. And it was, the right tool for the job for those 2 things. So I really, anyone who wants to dip their toe into, I guess this might be my theme of the day. Same thing with Cypress, same thing with Svelte. If it's easy, I'll do it. So Svelte was like really easy. You can run through their tutorial in a day and kind of understand Svelte fundamentals. And then start building a little something and kind of see how easy it is to make reactive stuff.
I don't think you're necessarily alone in that as well. Like, I think most people are like, if it's easy, I'll do it. Right.
Yeah.
So I guess I have a question for both Cypress and Svelte then. Are there kind of community? I mean, one of the strengths of Drupal is its community. Are there communities built up around those 2 technologies that you're part of?
Yeah, I would say Cypress is very active. There's almost always an update for Cypress between my 2-week sprints when I'm writing tests. They'll be like, oh, update to Cypress. So that project is very active. In terms of like community, I haven't really interacted with the Cypress community much because I haven't needed to. A lot of the documentation is right there on cypress.io.
Interesting.
I've not really needed to reach anywhere besides there to get some answers. I would say the Svelte community is strong and passionate, but it's not the biggest one out there yet. But it's very much trending. The latest State of JavaScript survey, I think, listed Svelte as the biggest sort of up-and-comer, had the most growth over the last year. It's nowhere near the community, like the threshold of React or the usage or adoption of React, but these people are passionate. SvelteKit is actually put out by the same people as Svelte, very different than like the Next.js paradigm, right, or Gatsby, where other people have come up with like an opinionated way to build React apps. The SvelteKit is from Svelte. It's from those same folks. So there probably are competitors out there to SvelteKit, but I don't know what they are. But I'll say this, I have not been unable to find what I've needed, like in terms of like, I need a Svelte NPM package that I can, that will wrap fetch or whatever it is, I guess you don't really need to wrap fetch these days, but like I've never been unable to find something I've needed. So the community is definitely there.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's an important part of it though. Adoption, it's why I'm Ubuntu when it comes to Linux, because with with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow, right? So if you have the community there, it's easy.
There's at least workarounds or solutions. Yeah. And sometimes it's even just recommended ways to do something, and seeing the different pros and cons is helpful.
This is complete non sequitur, but I immediately, when you said, bugs are shallow, I immediately was like, why are we defining the personality traits of a bug?
That's from the Cathedral and the Bazaar. That was the. Are you all familiar with the Cathedral and the Bazaar?
No, Chris Wells.
All right, go read it, and that's your homework. And
this is why we have you on, because you're very enlightened and intelligent.
Yeah.
So I've actually got a couple of projects myself that are going on right now that are non-Drupal. And this first one, I can't go too much into the details of what it is, but it's what we're actually building, but it's a fully custom application that we're building. So it's more, there's certainly a website component, but it's an actual application. And it's using a lot of different technologies to manage it, some really cool stuff to kind of set up a lot of the business logic and microservices on AWS. And it's using Node.js. But the part that I'm working on that's kind of interesting is, it's a large team. It's a larger team than a lot of the projects that I work on. Usually the work that I do is I'm kind of the architect of the project, and I help coordinate that. But this one, it's big enough that I'm architecting just mainly the entity structure and a lot of the business logic engines that are going to have to be created. So I'm not architecting the front end whatsoever, or even the microservice connection stuff. I'm just helping out here and there. The interesting thing for me, though, is we're using a tool that I'm sure people are familiar with called Type ORM, which is a TypeScript-based ORM package. So it's for building your database and entity structure in code, which is really interesting. It's forcing me to really think about things a little bit differently than you're used to, and it's on some level, it's really nice because it gives you a lot more control over what your entity structure looks like. So you can have a lot of really cool optimizations that sometimes you don't get exposed to on the higher level. But it also makes me really, really miss Drupal sometimes, because there's just some things that Drupal out of the box provides that you have to, when you're building something from scratch, you have to account for. For example, permissions. Obviously I've built custom permissions for things, but that's really just building a YAML file and then checking a box on a permissions table. For if I need a new role, I just add a new role in the UI for Drupal. For this project, that interface doesn't exist. That permissions table doesn't exist. Everything has to be built from scratch. And like I said, there's some advantages sometimes to rebuilding something like that, but it does really make you appreciate a lot of the work that's gone into Drupal over the last 20 years.
Absolutely. It makes me think of the other side. I mean, to some extent, it's a little sacrilegious for us to talk about our non-Drupal projects here on Talking Drupal. But it's the same thing with like when I taught at Appalachian, I taught web development, and I wouldn't let them touch Dreamweaver until, the teacher was like, here, teach them Dreamweaver. Like, here's the book. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So I wouldn't let them touch Dreamweaver until we were like, 3/4 of the way through the semester, so that they would appreciate what it does for you. And it's kind of the same thing here. We are sort of taking over a project that was built in this new modern JavaScript front end piece. And, it's all about the right tool for the job. So the big, non-Drupal project I have, it's because it was so simple that I wasn't going to throw Drupal at it. We're doing the exact opposite with this other project coming in, where this person who needs to manage her content, she has to do some of that in Sanity. But then if she wants to alter some other piece of it, then she's in the Fauna database. And then we're handling all of the user authentication in Vercel. And then, we're handling all the payments through Stripe. And she also has a Shopify site. And let me tell you what step one is. Step one is to take all of that and put it into Drupal, because you have one place to manage your users, one place to manage your content, one place to manage your commerce, and we'll decouple the piece of this app that is highly reactive and needs it. I I see what you're saying, that like when I don't choose Drupal, it's usually because of a need for things to be simpler, not for having to go back and build permissioning systems from scratch. That's what I'll start kicking myself.
It's interesting. This conversation thread has given me 3 points that I want to make. One is, Nick, it's like that old saying that distance makes the heart grow fonder. You move away from Drupal and then you're like, oh gosh, Drupal does all this cool stuff for me. Like, I got to go back there. Right. I will say though, Chris Wells, you are right about Drupal's not always the right fit. Right. Sometimes it's more, it makes things harder, right? Sometimes if the project is a smaller scope, or it's just easier to build basic HTML or whatever it is you're doing. That's the path you need to take. I think overall, we've made jokes about non-Drupal projects, and it's a Drupal podcast and we're talking about non-Drupal projects. But I think, one thing that over the years, or over the last several years, 5+, I guess I will say, I've seen in the Drupal community is this idea of getting off the island, right? And not being so Drupal centric. And I've actually seen Drupal shift itself from not so much a content management system, right? As an integration point for your greater platform and organization. So, I think it's interesting that you say, Chris, hey, they have all of these systems that are doing all these things. We're going to funnel all that into Drupal and let Drupal kind of play traffic cop as to where the data goes and how the data is structured. I think that over the last couple of years of my career is something that has been a focus of making Drupal that kind of midpoint glue, if you will, for all the disparate systems, and getting them to talk to each other and use the data in the most effective way. So I think that's an interesting change. And I think in its nature, that change requires us to kind of get familiar with other non-Drupal projects and systems and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn from other projects, that's for sure.
Yeah. Drupal's a great hub in a hub and spoke model.
Yeah. The other thing, and I'll be brief on this one because we're going to have a full show on this topic in, I think, a couple of months. But another project that I've been working on recently is something that's heavily using native web components. So the Drupal community over the last maybe 5 years really has embraced kind of the component-based design paradigm. But a lot of that is around, using something like Pattern Labs or twig-based components and tying those into strict entities. Whereas this project is using actual native web components, which are, custom HTML tags. And I have to say, there's just so much functionality that these provide. There are some really hard problems to solve, and I understand why they haven't become fully mainstream. But it's just, the more I use them for this project, the more I hope that some of those bigger problems get solved, so that these become kind of more the de facto way to do design. Because, if there's a feature that you need with a native web component, you can make sure that it's self-contained. And for example, we built a system that handles container queries at the CSS level, essentially, for this project. So we're building components that we're providing to many different development communities for this client. And we can't always be sure that they'll integrate them the way that we're recommending. So you can't just use normal responsive design principles, because you can't, knowing that something is 1200 wide isn't enough, for example, because the browser is 1200 wide, because if you're expecting it to be a full width component, 1200 means it's 1200. But if they put it in, a layout block that's 1000 wide, even though the browser is 1200 wide, or they put it in the sidebar, for example, that's 200 wide, and it's trying to fit to 1200 wide, it's just going to blow up. But with container queries, it knows that it's 200 wide, and it will just show the mobile layout, even though it's on, a 1200 screen. So things like that would just be very, fairly difficult to do in a traditional sense. We've been able to pull together. I'm really excited about that native web component show.
Yeah, I'm keeping my eye on that. I think it's the way forward, and whether or not it's the sort of iteration of native web components we're on now, or if there's a more major shift, but that's where it's headed. It's all going to be native. It's all going to be built in, and container queries by themselves are just like a game changer. So
I can't wait until they're like fully just supported, because it's like, I remember, when I first met John and Steven in person was at a responsive boot camp. And I remember walking away from that being like, this changes everything. And container queries feels like that at another level, because knowing what space it's in just allows you to kind of bypass so much. Like it's really like, it's definitely a different way of thinking. It's taken a fair amount of work to get the front end developers and designers to really wrap their minds around it.
Yeah.
But it makes the layout context blind. Like, you don't need to know what's happening around it. You just need to know, like, when I have this much space, this is what I should look like.
And that, I mean,
easy.
I went big on Layout Builder after John's presentation at maybe Design for Drupal about when you first dipped into Layout Builder, per page layout builder, layout built pages. And that's what I'm running into is like, well, somebody's taking this component that we really designed for a 1 call and they're putting it in a 2 call with layout builder. And so I really need to reflow this. And I'm having to rely on a lot of the layout classes to be able to drill down to like, oh, well, it's in a 2 call and it's in either a left or a right of layout 2 call section 2. And boy, it would be really great to be able to just write a whole component's worth of SAS with container queries, and I can't wait.
Actually, the way that we're doing it, I'll just say the way that we're doing it, you probably could integrate that. There's a native listener that's supported in almost all browsers. I think it's resize object.
Yeah.
And then it's a fast, natively supported listener, and you just use that to place a class in the container based on how wide it currently is. Yeah. So it could be like, between 600 and 900, you might go, it might be
small,
so you can
or slap your
and
own
then you just
classes
have
right on the component.
Yeah. And then you just have the CSS react to that. Like, if you're in this container, you do this, and it just, because it's, native, it's very quick. And because it's CSS, it's just CSS. Like, it doesn't have to like really think about it. It kind of just works. So I'll definitely try to get a little write-up on how we solve that problem before we have that show, because I think that'll be helpful.
Cool.
Yeah, the point I was going to make was simply that sometimes those things can also be rectified with like design system documentation, depending on what the end product is, right? So saying
we
like
have plenty of that.
Saying like, no, content person, don't try to put that 1 column component in a 2 column layout, because that's
exactly
just gonna...
And we have our fair share of rules, but all of a sudden we're like, oh wait, you did put a video in a 2 call, and there's no real reason why we shouldn't have a video in a 2 call. We just need to push the caption down or do something else to make it work. And that's really the instance. Yeah, we've got plenty of rules, let me tell you, and layout builder restrictions and block deny list or whatever. We've got a lot of configuration going on there. But
and the thing is, on some level, you want to give them that flexibility. Like, if they decide with content queries, if they decide that they want to put it in the sidebar, as long as you have like a mobile layout that looks good for that kind of thing, why not?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's better to account for something like that and have it look good, and then tell them after the fact, like, hey, by the way, this isn't meant to be in a 200 thing, then have it just look like crap, and then because they'll probably just leave it if they have.
It's like a whole show topic right there. How much flexibility is too much flexibility? Because I think like ultimately, yes, flexibility is good, and that's what a lot of the web and component based layout is going towards, right? But I think like you also have to plan for that, and that's where it's like a marriage between like what you can do with the system, and then like the rules that are guiding the design system to say like, no, you can't do that. I mean, you can do that, but like you're not going to, because it's going to look like.
We should also have another show on like CSS variables and the flexibility that gives you too, because that's another one of those things where like I've used them in the past, but not the full power of them. And with this project, I'm just learning so
Jin
much.
Makes a really good use. Jin makes really good use of those color variables and size variables, and it's really.
It's something that I'm actually using on it's funny, Nick, the more you talk about the project you're working on, it's very similar to the project I'm working on. So it has some similarities, but I think it's just more that's kind of the way that the web is going.
Well, thank you for joining us, Chris, and thank you for chiming in on the first off the cuff with a guest host. So it's definitely a fun experience, and looking forward to having you for the next few weeks.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or via email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. If you're interested in show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and Chad's Book Corner, sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron in the sidebar.
And Chris, if our listeners want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
I am Chris from Redfin on just about all the things. So Twitter is a great place where I engage people for tech stuff. I am also pretty active in the Drupal Slack. And Drupal.org, whatever you want to do. And find us at redfinsolutions.com.
And John, how about you?
I am at John Picozzi on all the major social networks and Drupal.org. By the time this show comes out, I will be at DrupalCon. So if you are at DrupalCon and you see me or hear me, say hi. Love to meet our listeners in real life. And if you'd like to know more about EPAM, you can go to epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.
See you later.